need to suffer? The simple answer is yes. Humans need to suffer. Okay, but why? Well, Mariframe the Syrian says, suffering is the school of wisdom, or the battle of wisdom that is well demonstrated in the book of Job. So there's a beneficial misery, which is the fountain of joy of the new world. So what does that mean? So it means that there's a type of suffering, a type of being upset, a type of being sad that teaches us, that makes us better people. There's obviously the sinful type where we sit there in our grief and we get upset and nothing makes it better. But there's a type of misery which is beneficial. Abuna Tadros Malati also comments on this and he says, let your sufferings become books that give you advice. God measures the suffering by the need of it. The house of grief teaches compassion and wisdom. So suffering is important. Why? Because suffering teaches us to be better people. Suffering, we learn from our sufferings, and it's during the times that we're suffering the most that we actually get the closest to God. You know, in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus was praying on the Mount of Olives before he went up to be crucified, you know, that was when his prayer was at the strongest. That was when his prayer was, he was crying blood, sweating drops of blood. At the time where he was suffering the most, that's where he was closest, the most fervent in his prayer. And it's the same for us. So the times that we're at our lowest, learn the most about ourselves. So, part 2, is this really necessary? This is the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 8. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. So, God is proud of Job. God is talking Job up to Satan. He's saying, wow, look at Job, my servant. He's the best there is. He's amazing. So even for this just one fact alone, this would make suffering worth it. To be able to have God look at us and say, oh wow, this is my best servant. This is Anthony, the best servant I've ever had. Well, what a title to get. You know, that in and of itself will make us feel so wanted and so loved. So, and the last point that we're going to talk about, is this really necessary? Suffering does not make man lose his peace or his inner joy. It has actually made King David, the sweet psalmist of Israel, as is demonstrated in his book of Psalms. So suffering is necessary because during our moments of suffering, that's when we get closest to God. So I think this is pretty clear. So we'll just move on in the interest of time. All right. Cool. So it's necessary. Suffering is necessary. But why me? All right. Why me, God? Well, surely somebody else can suffer. But this is actually a trick question. The real question should be, why not me? Why shouldn't I be the one to suffer? So instead of turning around and asking God, why am I the one to suffer? We have this image in our mind that suffering is a bad thing. And obviously, when we're in the moment of suffering, it's not enjoyable. We're not having a good time. But when we look at it from an outside perspective, we can see that as we suffer, there's very big rewards and very big blessings for the sufferings that we go through. For example, the trials and tribulations of the martyrs. We're promised crowns in heaven. Crowns in heaven for our trials and tribulations. In the book of John, the Gospel of John, Christ makes it very clear as well. He says, in the world you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Very good. So the question is not, why me? Why am I the one suffering? The question should be, why not me? Why not me? Why shouldn't I be the one to get these blessings? Why shouldn't I be the person who strives and who tries hard and to get closer to God to get these blessings? To be the person that God will turn around and say, look, this is my best servant on earth. This is the one who loves me with all of their heart. Okay. Oh. Cool. So, the other thing we might ask is, but I'm righteous. Why would God trouble me like this? It's too much. I'm doing services. This is too much for me to do. Like maybe like I'll do a little bit of suffering because I'm busy. I need to do other things. Like this is too much for me to handle. And I think the answer to this is also very clear. So St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, he says, "No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it." So God doesn't just leave us in our times of temptation and tribulation. He doesn't tempt us. Oh, okay, so okay, you're a righteous person, so here's your suffering. Good luck, have fun. God doesn't do that. He knows our limits as human beings, and He doesn't leave us by ourselves. And I think, if we think, for those of us who did swimming lessons, when you do swimming lessons, like the swimming instructor doesn't just tell you, okay, here's a pool, here's how to swim, good luck, have fun. No, of course not. They stay with you. They follow you around. They make sure you're able to swim. They make sure you're able to float. And then if you're in trouble, they help you. And it's the same with God. God doesn't just give us all these sufferings and say, have fun. This will make you a very good person. No. He holds our hand during the whole process and He supports us. So we're not by ourselves at all during this process. And we're going to discuss this in more detail during the last part. So why me, part 3? Why not me? So why not me? Because this makes me stronger. So we spoke about suffering is important because it's something that we use to become closer to Christ, to build our spirituality. But more than that, it actually builds you as a person. Exactly right, you learn. You learn from your mistakes. And that's why they say like you can have someone tell you many, many times, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But the only time you really learn to not do it is after you do it for yourself and you get burnt. You realize, I did the wrong thing. I shouldn't have done that. And that memory of you doing it is what's going to teach you, I shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing. So as good as Job was in the beginning of the book of Job, he will be a better man at the end of it. He was better in character. He became more humble. And he was more blessed, double than what he was before his suffering. So one of the fathers comments and he says, "Foolish devil, he is piling up a pedestal on which God will set his servant Job, that he may be looked upon with wonder by all ages. Oh, how many saints have been comforted in their distress by this history of patience." So what it's saying here is the devil doesn't realize that what he's doing is he's giving God an opportunity to show his most prized servant Job. So the devil, by trying to test Job, is giving an opportunity for God to turn around and say, see, I told you. I told you he's the best servant. I told you he loves me with all of his heart. So we use this to make our faith stronger. 1 Peter chapter 1 says, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ." So what does that mean, the bit that we just read? So St. Peter's saying, look, for a little while, you might suffer. You might be tested. You might be tempted. You might go through a very difficult patch. Your service might not be doing well. Your financial situation might not be doing well. Your relationships, your friendships, they might not be the best. You might be having issues at work. But the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. When we think about it, during the moments that we suffer, it comes down to whether we trust God or don't trust God. Because if we trust God, then it doesn't matter that I'm going through this. It doesn't matter that I've lost my job, because God has a better plan. God knows the future. God knows that I'm going to lose my job. And so God's not just going to leave me behind and say, okay, you've lost your job. I've heard many log are hiring, like, it's not going to be like that. God's not going to just leave us in the dust. So when we go through these sufferings and these trials and tribulations, the question is not why me. The question is why not me? Because I know that God will be there with me during these sufferings. And also, so the last reason is it's an example for the people in the future to look back on. So we're blessed here because we have the book of Job. We have this story where we can see how Job was very blessed, very righteous, lost everything, and still trusted in God. So we have this story that we can turn around and look back on and say, wow, I want to have a faith like that. I want to be someone who trusts in God to that level. So not only do we build ourselves, but we can leave a good example for the people who look at us. For most of us, that'll be our Sunday school kids. Alrighty, so 11 minutes in, we'll move on to the last point. Okay, so we have to suffer, and we know the question now is not why me, the question is why not me. So now we're going to say, where are you? Where is God in my sufferings and my lowest moments? Am I alone? Okay. So something we might not really notice is that God was actually with Job from the beginning, even before his suffering. How do we know this? The devil, when he was talking to God in chapter 1, this is the verse. So this is Satan talking to God. It says, have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. So we look at the end of the story, we look at the middle, we talk about the sufferings of Job, but we forget that even from the beginning of the story, God was protecting him. God was like a hedge. I don't know if you guys know what a hedge is. Hedges are like these very thick bushes. You know, like the people have, like, instead of building fences, they'll build a hedge. Like they'll grow a hedge and they water it. And it's this very thick plant that you can't see past. It's like a wall, but it's made of plants. So God has protected Job to this level. He has blessed him to this level, even before anything has happened. So sometimes in the middle of our sufferings, we might say, God, where are you? Like this is a difficult tribulation. But think on the past. You've been spared all of this suffering in the past. You've been spared all of the things that could have gone wrong in the past. How many people do we know who've lost jobs, who've lost family members, who've been in car accidents, who've had all these things happen to them? And for some of us, that might not have happened to us. We might take that for granted, like, oh, it's just luck of the draw. But have we really thought that maybe this is God who's protecting us? Maybe this is God who's turning around and saying, you're my son, I'm going to protect you. You're my daughter, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. So there's a very nice poem that I think all of us have heard many times, but for those of us who haven't heard it, this is called the Footprints poem. So this is a poem about God being with us in difficult times. So I'll read it quickly, it's only about a minute. So one night, a man had a dream. He dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord. Across the sky flashed scenes from his life. For each scene, he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to him and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand. He noticed that many times along the path of his life, there was only one set of footprints. He also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in his life. This really bothered him, and he questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I have noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there is only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. The Lord replied, my son, my precious child, I love you and I would never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. So I don't know about you guys, but that always hits me in the feel every time I hear that poem. So It might feel like God has abandoned us in those moments where we've got the suffering, we've got the trials, we've got the tribulations. But it's actually in those moments where God supports us the most. We just might not realize. So, part 3. So, this is probably one of the best lessons we can learn from Job. God is in control. So this is also chapter 1, verse 20 to 21. Then Job arose. So this is after he found out that all of his possessions have been destroyed, all of his family members are dead. He's just been hit with everything at once. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So Job knows he came into this world with nothing. So everything that he has from this point on is a blessing from God. If he now has less, it's still more than what he had when he came into the world. And it's more than what he's going to have when he leaves the world in the end of days. So he knows every single thing that he has good in his life is a blessing from God. So sometimes we might, talk about people and say, "Oh, he was lucky to have been born into a rich family. He was lucky, he's got so much money, his parents are rich or whatever." But this is all planned by God. This is all a blessing from God. One of the fathers comments on this and says, "I am so pleased to think that Job recognized the hand of God everywhere giving." He said, "The Lord gave." He didn't say, "I earned it all. These are my hard-earned savings gone." So when we lose money, for example, we might turn around and say, "Oh, my savings. Oh, I lost money in cryptocurrency, my savings, whatever." It's not your money to begin with. What are you crying about? What are you upset about? This money that you're losing is not yours. This is God's money. So Job recognized, and this is something that we can learn from Job. He recognized that God is always in control. God gives and God takes away. Doesn't matter how God does it. God can give through a good job, or God can give through a surprise. God can give through a gift. God can give through service. But God can also take away however he wants to take away. But he's in control. So that's the key. Okay. So, in summary, Job recognized through the good and the bad that God is always there, right from the very start. I've hit 18 minutes. I was 3 minutes over time. Many apologies. Thank you very much. Glory be to God for a moment. Yes, question?
You mentioned before, at the very beginning, where it says it's really necessary suffering part, and it goes, you said that, I mentioned earlier that it helps you learn, helps you grow, How this beautiful quote here, I should share it, better than most people someone. So sometimes you must be hurt in order to know, fall in order to grow, lose in order to gain, because life's greatest lessons are learned through suffering.
Oh, brilliant. That's a perfect summary.
The other thing as well, if you want to gain anything in the big world, you have to suffer. They say, no pain, no gain. Everything, even. Okay? Therefore, why you not suffer for the kingdom of heaven? That's mean everything. If you want to gain, if you want to success in your study, you have to study hard. If you want to go to, for instance, to build up building, you have to go to the gym and you suffer. Why? To gain something.
Did you have a question?
Yes. Yes.
Did you have a question?
I can say something more.
Please.
So for example, we asked God to do something, God giving wisdom, God giving patience. Obviously, it's going to give you tribulation. It's going to give you someone annoying from you to give you patience. If you ask Him for patience,
And use the
Go ahead.
opportunity.
True.
exactly. So,
That's true.
so you're not just gonna, it's not gonna come to you. You need to suffer to get wisdom, patience, forgiveness, all this stuff. You need to learn the hard way.
100%. Yes.
How do we know that God is with us when we're suffering?
Good question. Does anyone else want to contribute? How do we know that God's with us when we're suffering? Faith. But, okay, so...
You accept that it's from Him.
Mm.
That this suffering is because God wants me to. Like, God needs this from me.
Mm.
God has a plan for me.
Mm.
That you believe that this is what He wants, and then He's going to take you through.
Mm.
If obviously it's not going to be.
So we can believe the suffering might be from God. So then how do we know that God's with us, like Chris's question?
You want to be, like, if you want to know if God is you or not, do you have to be with God first so you know if God is you? So during the suffering, you have to go to God and talk to Him. Then He give you comfort and then take you through that.
Exactly right. I think that's the key. What does anyone else have anything they want to add?
Because if you're suffering and thinking about all your suffering and just leave God up behind and not talking to Him, you'll be staying suffering forever. You're not going to learn the things you're not going to get out of it. But through God, you come out and you learn things as well, I guess.
Murray?
I think that, for example, if we're outside the church, we suffer, but like here, it's different our suffering because we actually have to follow the law. For example, somebody stabs you, you need to turn the other cheek. Outside, somebody suffers like that, we just fight back, you know what I mean? So
Mm.
they're not using the commandment that was given by God. So in order to have God by your side during tribulations, I think
I think all of the answers combined are completely correct. I think, this is just my opinion, I think the key is a relationship with God. Like what Murray and Mum were saying. Because when you start to know someone, you start to trust in that person, right? And you start to know that this person is not going to let you down. And then, if I know that God is not going to let me down, then when I read in the Bible, a passage that says, I'm with you always, even unto the end of ages. How can I not believe that? Because I know that God is real. I have this relationship with God. I trust in God. So then I look at His word and I read His word, and His word says, I'm with you always. Do not be afraid or dismayed. I will not leave you. Wow, like this is support. The first chapter of the book of Joshua, for example, that Carol likes a lot and has given to all of us. It's beautiful, talking about God supporting Joshua and being with him through everything. So the more that we know God and the more that we read His word, we can see situations in the Bible where these people at their lowest, these people were really struggling. But they turned to God and they said, I need you. And we can see that the whole time God has been there. Even during, for example, when King David committed sin with Bathsheba, God was still there with him. And God saw, and God's the one who came to him afterwards and said, you did this. If God wasn't with him and left him in his suffering, he would have just been there on the floor. But he realized, and he came back to God and he said, have mercy upon me, God. And he restored King David's kingdom. I hope that answers the question. Did you have any thoughts?
No, it's good answer.
Any other questions?
I was hoping you could give us a recap on the 4 points really quickly. I think we want the summary.
Oh, sure. No problems. So, 4 points in summary. Is this really necessary for us to suffer? Yes, it's necessary because it's one of the best ways that we grow as people and we get closer to God. Why me? We realize that this is the wrong question. The question should be, why not me? Because suffering is beneficial for me. And God's never going to tempt me more than I'm able to handle. He's never going to let me suffer more than I'm able to suffer. And so the third point is, where are you? Well, God's actually been with us all along. And we know this because He's promised it to us many times in the Bible, that He's with us even unto the end of ages. He's with us no matter what. He's also told us there's going to be tribulations, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. So God who's with us has overcome the world. So the summary is, trust that God who you know, God who you've built a relationship with, that same God is above the world. And that same God is able to overcome sufferings and tribulations. Question? No? Okay. Any other questions?